This morning I'd like to talk briefly about the truth of the resurrection. We talk about the Christian faith as being something that we just have to have. We have to have faith. It's this big leap where there's all these unknowns and we can't be sure of anything. But if we look at the Gospels and we look at other archaeological facts and writings from other ancient authors, we can see that Christianity actually makes sense, and that the resurrection, there is some evidence for it. There is some proof for it, if you will, that it actually occurred in what people did and how they responded. So I'm going to go through some of those today, and some of the common objections that some of the secular world presents against the resurrection. Now, the disciples claimed that Jesus rose from the dead. We know that. The first problem we have there is that if Jesus hadn't risen from the dead, the Jews would have produced the body, it says here. That's the first issue. They would have said, here's the body, he didn't raise from the dead, but they couldn't produce the body because he really had risen from the dead. And the Gospels tell us also that the body was indeed missing. Now, probably some of you have heard of a thing called the Jesus Seminar. There's a group of scholars, lowercase s, out there who get together every few years and they decide whether or not Jesus really said this or that. They're searching for the historical Jesus. And supposedly, they sit around, they read a passage in the Bible, and if they don't think Jesus said it, or if they do think Jesus said it, they'll throw like a bead in a bowl or something like that, and then if there's enough beads in the bowl, they decide whether he really. Anyway, one of the members, who you may have heard of, his name is John Dominic Crowson, contends that Jesus' body was eaten by wild dogs. Yeah, it's a disturbing thing. Now, if we look at the Gospels, we see that the Jews asked for a guard to be put on the tomb. Now, if Jesus' body had been left to be eaten by wild dogs, why would they need a guard at the tomb? If his body were simply eaten by wild dogs, wouldn't the disciples' fabrication of the resurrection be easily disproved? Because everybody would have known this. Romans often left their crucifixion victims on the cross to be eaten by wild animals. So the proof would have easily been there. He didn't rise from the dead, there he is. But they couldn't produce the body. And the resurrection would have been just dismissed as a folly. But how can you begin a religious movement based on someone rising from the dead when everyone knows that he wasn't even buried? Interesting problem. And then there's the empty tomb. Now the Jews say that the disciples stole the body. And there's some problems with this. Number one, how did they get by the guards? These were trained Roman soldiers. They knew how to guard someone. And you know what would happen to them if they fell asleep on duty, like the Jews said? They would be executed. They would be executed. So I don't think there was any disciples slipping in and stealing the body. And then how would they move this big stone without the guards hearing it? They're all napping over there. I'm sure this big stone had to make some racket as you moved it. And if we look at the whole issue with the guards falling asleep and the execution, remember the story of Paul and Silas in prison in Acts? Remember, they were in prison. The prison guard thought they had escaped, and so he was going to kill himself because he knew that if they did escape, he'd be killed, and maybe all his family. So there really was an empty tomb. There really was a body put in the tomb that rose from the dead. And then there's a thing called the swoon theory. This is a theory that says, well, Jesus really wasn't all that sick, or really wasn't all that bad a shape when he came down from the cross. He really wasn't dead. So the disciples came, Joseph of Arimathea came, and they took his body down, and he was in the tomb, and it was all nice and cool in there, and it revived him. And 3 days later, he's up walking around like there was nothing ever happened. Now, for those of you who saw the Passion of the Christ, remember the scourging scene? It's so difficult to watch. They say that it was probably worse than that. During a scourging, it was often common for internal organs or the spine to be exposed. I mean, some people were actually killed by the scourging. 3 days later after that, let alone the crucifixion, you're not going to be up and walking around. I don't care what kind of refrigeration they put you in. Really. You're not going to be up and walking around. This scourging causes also a severe loss of blood called hypovolemic shock, which means that you lose a lot of blood volume. When that happens, you get very lightheaded, you pass out. And here are some things I gleaned from the internet. The heart would race to the pump blood that was not there. The victim would collapse or faint due to low blood pressure. The kidneys would shut down to preserve body fluids. The person would experience extreme thirst as the body desired to replenish lost fluids. And we can connect all these things to the Gospels. Jesus said, I am thirsty. Jesus is so weak that Simon has to carry his cross, the crossbar. And then there is the lance driven in the heart. Now, the first issue with this is that Roman soldiers knew how to kill someone. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They were professionals. And if, perchance, they crucified somebody and he came down from the cross and he wasn't really dead, guess what would happen to them? They would be executed. That's why the lance was driven into his side. They wanted to make sure he was dead. Prior to death, the sustained rapid heartbeat caused by hypovolemic shock causes fluid to gather in the sac around the heart and around the lungs. This gathering of fluid in the membrane around the heart is called pericardial effusion, and the fluid gathering around the lungs is called pleural effusion. This explains why, after Jesus died and a Roman soldier thrust a spear through his side, piercing both the lungs and the heart, blood and water came from his side, just as John recorded in his Gospel. See how it all lines up with the Gospel. What really happened is recorded in the Gospel. And then there's the question, could someone survive their heart being punctured, let alone their lung, because he's coming from below and is probably going through the lungs and the heart. There is no way Jesus survived the cross. Absolutely no way. And again, the Roman soldiers are experts in execution. Are they going to risk their own death by allowing someone to walk away from the cross? I don't think so. And then there's the whole issue of the tomb. How did he move the stone? He'd been on the cross, very weak, even if he's in this cool place for 3 days. How does one person move these huge stones? You've probably seen them in pictures. I mean, they're like this big, like a foot thick. They're not something that you're going to move easily, even a very strong, healthy man. And how did he unwrap himself? Remember, Lazarus comes out of the tomb. He's probably doing one of these. And Jesus says, help him, unwrap him, because he can't unwrap himself. How did he get by the guards? Well, that's right, they were asleep, weren't they? I mean, there's so many problems with these theories. And again, if he survived the cross, how's he going to be up and moving around 3 days later? If that happened today, at the very least, he would be in intensive care, in critical conditions. And then there's those who say that the resurrection and the Gospels were fabricated. If we look at the Gospels, and I think one reason we can believe the Gospels is because there's a lot of stuff written in there that is very unflattering to the disciples. Think about this. If you're going to write a book, or you're going to create a religion, and you're going to be one of the chief guys in the religion, what are you going to write? Are you going to write down that you betrayed Jesus? Are you going to write down that when he showed up, you didn't believe that it was really him? Doubting Thomas? Are you going to record these things? Are you going to record all the times that the disciples seemed clueless? There's one passage in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus, or maybe it's Matthew, that Jesus looks at him and says, "Are you still so dull?" Well, if I'm going to write something like that, I'm probably not going to write stuff that, I'm not going to make up stuff that make me look like a fool. Right? But because this is the truth, and the disciples knew that, it was recorded that way. Also, if you're going to record the story of the resurrection, you're going to make it up. And unfortunately, women were not held in the highest esteem during those times. They were not considered reliable witnesses. Would you have women be the first one that's seen, saw him raised from the grave? Would you have women be the one that go to the disciples and say, "He's risen, I've seen him, he's alive"? And the disciples will say, "No, he's not. You must be crazy." You're not. You're going to say, "I was the one that went. I found him. He was alive." You're going to pump yourself up. You're not going to use an unreliable witness to make your case. And then there's the cross. The symbol of death, shame, humiliation, defeat. If you're going to choose a leader for a new religion, are you going to choose one that's just been executed on a Roman cross? The ultimate. It's like today's, like an electric chair. You know? I mean, are you going to exalt someone who's just been executed to have them start your new religion? It doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? And the idea in Roman culture that you would start a movement or religion where the leader has just died or been executed would be absolutely scandalous. Absolutely scandalous. And then there's Jesus' appearances after the resurrection. Jesus appeared to many different people, and Paul says, I think it's in 1 Corinthians, that he at one time appeared to over 500 people. Well, we could say that if it was individual people, that maybe they were just imagining it. Okay, they just imagined Jesus. I'm alone, I'm in my bedroom, Jesus shows up. It's just my imagination. But when he shows up in front of 500 people all at once, that kind of thing they can't all imagine the same thing. It's not some kind of mass hysteria. They can't all join together and see the same illusion. And there were many people alive at this time, many people still alive, that were witness to the crucifixion, that were there for the resurrection, and all of this could have easily been disclaimed, discredited, if it had been untrue. All of it could have easily been discredited. And the disciples. Legend has it that every disciple except John, tradition has it every disciple but John, was martyred for their faith. Now think about that for a moment. Of course, we have Muslims going around blowing themselves up, believing that they're going to go to wherever it is they could go when they die to be with Allah. And there are many people who are willing to die for their beliefs. But are you willing to die for something that is a lie? When you got your head down on the chopping block and the executioner is about to put the sword down on the back of your neck and you made this whole thing up, I'm going to recant pretty quickly. But they died knowing that this happened. They died believing in what they saw. You're not going to die for a lie. And then there's the idea that Jesus orchestrated all this. Jesus wanted to be a Messiah, so he orchestrated everything in his life to all work out, so that he'd be proclaimed Messiah. Well, there are prophetic messages in the Old Testament. There are over 300 prophecies that Jesus fulfilled as Messiah. The odds of that are astronomical. And it's something like if you took the state of Texas and you put 2 feet worth of quarters or $50 on Texas, and then you went and picked one single one out, those are the odds that Jesus could fulfill all these 300 prophecies. It's just outrageous. But he did. And if you think about this, it was prophesied that Jesus would be born in Bethlehem. How do you work that out? How do you prearrange that? You can't. How do you prearrange your execution? I suppose you could. But the Jews certainly aren't going to cooperate with him and execute him when he wants to be executed. Why would you do that? And the time of his crucifixion and death was the very time that the lambs were being sacrificed in the temple. And the Jews were saying prayers at that same time for forgiveness and redemption. No coincidence. And how do you orchestrate soldiers gambling for your clothes? How do you orchestrate the accuracy of Psalm 22? You read through Psalm 22. There is no forensic description of crucifixion in the Gospels. They simply say, and they crucified Jesus. We get our evidence for what crucifixion was like archaeologically and from Psalm 22. And if you read Psalm 22, you can see how closely it paralyzes, it's parallel to Jesus' experience on the cross. These things are no coincidence. They're no accidents. They're nothing that Jesus orchestrated. And then there are those who say that Jesus faked all of this. How do you fake healing so many people? Pretty soon you're going to be exposed as a charlatan, but he's not really healing anybody. But there's none of that recorded in the Gospels. And as I read the Gospels, people were coming from everywhere to be touched and healed by Jesus. And not only is he changing their lives physically, but he's changing their lives emotionally and socially. Mary Magdalene is a great example. Her life turned upside down in a good way by Jesus. All of this was predicted in Psalm 22 and Isaiah 53. All of it. He would be rejected by his people, and he would be received by the Gentiles. So, of course, with all this forensic kind of information, the important thing is, what does it mean to us? And just for a moment, think about what if it isn't true. Where do we stand with God if this isn't true? We're in big trouble. How can we stand as sinners in front of a righteous God? Who will pay for our sins? There is nothing that we can give to God. We have nothing to give him. Nothing at all. He can create anything he wants. Well, God, you can have my record collection. God can create all the records he wants. There is no way that we can pay for our own sin. That's why we need Jesus Christ. Jesus died. He chose to die. He willingly went to the cross. Paul says that or maybe it's Hebrews, it says that he joyfully endured the shame of the cross. Joyfully. Because on that cross, he was displaying his love, and he was seeing each of us, knowing that he was redeeming us. Through all the physical and spiritual pain that he endured, he was doing it for us, for you and me. What an amazing, amazing gift. If he had not died, we'd have no choice. we would be subject to eternal death, subject to eternal death. And this sounds harsh, but it's true. We have a choice. Every person on earth has a choice between heaven and hell. It's their choice. Jesus offers the gift of himself. The gift of himself. And all we need to do is say yes to that gift. The truth of all this is that Jesus knew that we needed a Savior. He went on this rescue mission to save us. And he willingly gave himself as a substitute for us on the cross. Because the cross is what we deserve. And the divine exchange, Jesus took what we deserved and gave us what he deserved. And that was all motivated by his great love. His great love for you and me. No greater love has a man than he laid down his life for his friends. That's what Jesus did. So the question for us, believer, non-believer, I hope everyone here is a believer. I hope that you receive Christ. If you haven't, I encourage you to do so. Explore this. You'll find it's true. If you have, then what does knowing this impact? How does this impact your life? Knowing that this man willingly died for you. It should mean everything to you. Because it is everything. He is everything. There is nothing that you and I can do to earn our salvation. Nothing at all. It's only Jesus, and relying on his finished work on the cross. His complete work. Lord, I'm not worthy except through your Son, and your Son is made me worthy. And because of that, we can now enter the throne of grace. We can stand boldly in front of God our Father. Because when God looks at us, he sees Jesus and his finished work. What a glorious, glorious gift he was given us. And that's what we celebrate today. We live in a resurrection life.
Amen.
A resurrection life. Don't dwell on the other side of the cross. We've sinned, yes, we continue to sin. Ask forgiveness, repent of it, and then look to the empty tomb, because that's where our life is. That's where our life is. Let's pray. Jesus, Lord, we thank you so much for your sacrifice on the cross for us. It is a gift that is beyond our comprehension, but is a gift we are so grateful for. It is a gift that, Lord, we just look to you in amazement and in love. We thank you so much for what you did for us, that you endured our sin on the cross. And so, Jesus, we're asking you to come and be with us in even greater power. We're asking you to change our lives, Lord, to look into our hearts, to find places that need cleaning up. And Lord, we just offer them to you. Our sinful tendencies, those areas of our lives where we have wounds or struggles, we give them to you right now, Lord. As we burned those requests this morning that were on the cross, we give them to you, Lord. We thank you, Lord, that your yoke is easy and your burden is light. We thank you, Lord, for choosing to die for us and rise from the dead. We are risen in you. In Jesus' name. Amen.